So everyone, please meet Dennis. Dennis is going to talk about legal support for the private sector, an implementation agreement for the Moon Treaty.
Thank you. And thanks to the Moon Society for producing this event and to all of you for attending. My name is Dennis O'Brien and I'm a space lawyer. My journey began in 1985. Okay, today's topic is legal support for the private sector, an implementation agreement for the Moon Treaty. This is not the first time I have worked on the topic. In 1985, I was a member of the NASA Hastings Research Project in San Francisco, one of the earliest formal studies in space law. I wrote a paper, and let's see if I can get that up here. Oh, looks like I have to do this again. This little thing doesn't likes to get in the way of everything. There we go. The paper was titled OTV, an argument for the independent trader. It was about letting private sectors operate the orbital transfer vehicle beyond low Earth orbit. I argued, and this is in 1985, I argued that the development of outer space would not be sustainable unless we engaged the private sector and extended the free market economy into outer space. That would be the only way to get the needed resources, talent, drive, and creativity that the private sector provides. I ended up the introduction by saying, the technology for the OTVs is available, but has not yet been tapped. To the extent that this hesitancy results from an uncertain legal regime, the problem needs to be addressed. That was true in 1985, and it's true now. Unfortunately for me, in 1985, the US space policy required all launches to be done by the shuttle, even commercial satellites. Let's see if we got that here. Unknown to me, there was also a private study being done by NASA, studying the feasibility of its own orbital transfer vehicle program. Orbital transfer vehicle done by General Dynamics. The United States at that time was fully committed to a space transportation system that was fully owned and operated by the government. As a result, I received a polite letter from the White House that said, thanks, but no thanks. And then the following year, the Shuttle Challenger blew up. The policymakers decided that commercial satellites could indeed be launched by private industry. But at that time, they said all human space flight would still be the sole domain of NASA. And that worked until 2003, when the shuttle Columbia disintegrated on re-entry. After another review, the policymakers decided to give up on the shuttle design. Putting the crew alongside the booster instead of on top of it was just too dangerous. But in 2009, they made an even more crucial decision. They decided, instead of developing their own capsule, that they would pay private industry to build a new human-rated capsule, which they called the Commercial Crew Development Program. Finally, the full force of private industry and free market economics were brought to human spaceflight, and the results have been spectacular. And not just the latest mission that got people up there, but everything that else has happened. By starting to pump money into private industry and by allowing private industry to be involved in almost every aspect of spaceflight, private industry is taken off. How many companies are there that are ready right now to build a lander and put on the moon? I'm sure that the rest of this Lunar Development Conference has been a lot about that. Today, we're going to concentrate on the legal reasons, how to make it happen. So why hasn't this happened already? Why haven't people jumped up and said, let's use the Moon Treaty? Well, there is a problem. First of all, let's talk about the general problem. And that comes from the Outer Space Treaty. The Outer Space Treaty tells us in Article 2 that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty by means of use or occupation or by any other means. That's Article 2. And Article 6 specifies that this applies to governments and non-governmental entities, the private sector. So everyone is covered by the prohibition against appropriation. How does that affect private industry in the moon? Well, here's a quote from one of the attorneys. He heads up the organization that represents the U.S. mining industry. And I'm going to read this to you because it's so important. It says, I'm going to move this slightly. Here's the issue on the security of tenure, which is the marketability of materials, and the fiscal regime that goes with it. There's an outer space treaty that was signed by a lot of countries when the moon exploration was going on, and the treaty includes a provision that says you can't appropriate celestial bodies. That would include the moon. The question is, what happens if I go to the moon? And I'm sure you folks have dealt with this throughout this Lunar Development Conference, but this is a nice summary of it. What happens? I set up shop and I extract ice and rocks and start making things. Do I own the rocks that I've extracted? I'm not saying that I own the moon, but if I put in the effort, do I own the resources? The same thing with asteroids. If I send a robot, it sets up shop, starts extracting. Do you own the extracted materials? And that's the legal issue. That's the unsettled question. And that's the key phrase right there, because businesses and investors hate uncertainty. It is impossible to make informed business decisions or to calculate a return on investment with uncertainty. The market economy that we need to go up there, the market economy needs certainty if it is going to expand into outer space, okay? And that's why I'm proposing, well, there's a lot of proposals out there. Some of them are soft law, not a lot of hard law proposals. In fact, this may be the only one. But if the Moon Treaty is the answer to everything, why aren't people jumping up and saying, let's do it? Well, here's the main concern, and I'm sure you've already probably heard this too. The common heritage of mankind, a phrase that is used in the Moon Treaty and a couple of other places. Some countries and private people fear a loss of sovereignty and self-control when they hear of the common heritage of mankind. It is used in the Convention on the Law of the Seas, and that convention does include a framework that requires international approval for various enterprises. However, there is no binding legal precedent. The common heritage of mankind and the Moon Treaty means whatever we want it to mean. And we know that because that's exactly what the Moon Treaty tells us. Article 11, the famous Article 11, starts out saying, the moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind, which finds its expression in the provisions of this agreement, in particular in paragraph 5 of this article. Okay? Not that it finds its expression anywhere else or is based on anything else. No, it finds its expression in this agreement as described below. So let's go down below. What does the rest of it say? Why is this the solution? Article 11 continues. Number 2, it repeats the ban on national appropriation, the same wording as is in the Outer Space Treaty. But then it says the most important thing. The foregoing provisions are without prejudice to the international regime referred to in paragraph 5 of this article. So, number 1, common heritage of mankind. Number 2, ban against appropriation. Both of them do not affect whatever we decide to make the implementation that is required by Article 5. What's 5 say? States party to this agreement hereby undertake to establish an international regime. By the way, regime's an awful word. Regime change and all that. Most of us these days are calling it a legal framework for international agreements, something like that. Undertake to establish an international regime, including appropriate procedures to govern the exploitation of the natural resources of the moon as such exploitation is about to become feasible. Well, we know that last part's true. That's why we're having this Development Conference. That's why there's Artemis Accords. It has now become feasible to exploit the natural resources of the moon. So now we are in position to create the implementation agreement that will supersede the common heritage of mankind and the ban on appropriation. All we have to do is decide to do it and how to do it. So what are we going to do? Well, after working on this for a few years, I've discovered that there are 4 organizational principles that are important for most people and organizations. Number 1, the legal framework must be comprehensive in scope and support all private activity, not just mining. It's got to support everything. Number 2, trade private property rights for public policy obligations, what I call the grand bargain. If you accept the obligations of all the space treaties, then you get your private property rights. It's that simple. Number 3, the implementation agreement will defer issues that are currently at impasse, like the monetary sharing of benefits, by creating a governance process for making future decisions. It would be impossible to resolve all political issues at this point. Just like with the technical issues, we have to wait until the politics becomes feasible. And it's not yet feasible to resolve the issue about the monetary sharing of benefits. But we need to address all these other issues. So we create a governance process that will address these issues in the future, the ones that we can't resolve right now. And finally, as part of the whole thing, we build upon and integrate current institutions and processes. There is really no need to do everything again. It's enough to build upon what we have. It's actually really simple, and you'll see how that works now. We're going to go over there are 10 paragraphs in the actual agreement. Excuse me. The first 3 set up the process for granting these property rights. Number 1 creates an agency, and the role of the agency will be explained as we go through the other paragraphs. What's important to know now is that it is ministerial, not discretionary. It will not be making any substantive decisions. Those can only be made by the states parties themselves. Now, by the way, if you want a complete readout of the entire implementation agreement, plus a paper that explains it totally and lots of other articles about the subject, please go to spacetreaty.org and you'll get all that information. You also learn how to contact me if you want to make any comments or contributions to the progress of all this. Number 2, licenses for private activities. The states parties agree to authorize licenses for the exploitation of resources. And here's the important part. This is how it gets expanded from just mining to cover all private activities. Exploitation of resources shall include, but is not limited to, the extraction of materials. That's what everyone's been talking about. But then also, B, the use of a location for any other commercial activity, such as space tourism or solar farms. That's not at all covered in the Artemis Accords or other proposals. And C, the use of location for non-commercial private activity, such as private science or, more importantly, settlements. There's a vast group of people who are interested in these last 2 that are not covered by anything else going on right now. We have to include them in any future framework, or we're going to lose them. We'll lose all of their drive and creativity and resources, and it may just fail. So we must include all private activity if we're going to move forward. Third, the requirements for a license. The top part here is kind of legal technical. The plain English is down below. If a country adopts the Moon Treaty with this agreement and the other 4 space treaties, then any space activity it approves and supervises by a private actor is automatically granted a license, and they get those priority rights. That's it. They don't have to go through a separate process with the international authority or the regime or whatever you want to call it. All they have to do is be approved by their own country. And if their own country is a state party to the 5 space treaties, then they automatically get those rights, because their country is requiring them also. As it says above, the states parties agreed to require their nationals to accept the obligations of the treaty. Again, once they accept the obligations, then they get the trade-off, the private property rights. So what are those obligations? Well, I've listed them all here in number 4. We don't have time to go over them all. Almost all of them are also listed in other treaties, the Outer Space Treaty, the Registration Treaty, the Rescue Treaty, Convention, Agreement, whatever you want to call them. They're all treaties, except for one, and I have it in red here, the Discovery of Resources. There are some, let me get my notes together here. Sharing the discovery of resources may be the greatest obstacle to private sector accepting these obligations. Some would say that it is proprietary information protected by intellectual property laws. But sharing such information, excuse me, is part of sharing the benefits of outer space with less technologically advanced countries. And that's required in the Outer Space Treaty and in the Moon Treaty. Private operators must consider if sharing information is an acceptable trade for legally guaranteed access to materials and the marketability of their products. To me, it seems like a pretty easy trade. I hope to hear from people in the private sector to give their comments on that. Now, excuse me, the Moon Treaty also calls for the sharing of technology. Let me take that back. It doesn't say that specifically. It's actually the building blocks of the Hague Space Resources Governance Working Group that calls for the sharing of technology. And they say that it should be done on a mutually acceptable basis, either countries or private parties getting together to do that. What we've done is we've put in a backup that says that if they don't come up with such an agreement, that nationals will be required to license technology at no more than fair market value. Of course, that excludes technology that's subject to export controls. We can't force countries to give away state secrets. But if the company has technology that's not a state secret, then they need to share it. They'll get paid, but they need to share. That's the way we open up space and share the benefits with everyone. Excuse me, this is the most I've been talking in a long time, and I'm in air conditioning, so my voice is starting to go. Please bear with me. Number 6, this is how we incorporate everyone. Remember, organizational principle 4 was incorporate all the other organizations. Number 6 says that the states parties, in consultation with private enterprise and international organizations, agree to develop technological standards and recommended practices. This is, there are people, let's see who I have here. COSPAR, the Committee on Space Research, has been working on such standards for decades. They certainly would be part of this process. There are several new organizations which could also be folded into it. The Moon Society is one of them. The Moon Village Association is another. The next speaker is going to be Professor Michelle Hanlon of For All Moonkind. They've been doing a lot of work on this. Every one of these international organizations, and hopefully the Space Treaty Project will be part of that, should be pulled in by the states parties through their administration, through the agency, to help build these standards and practices. It would be a shame to waste all of the work that these organizations have put into this. It'll be a great match, a great fit. Number 7 specifically addresses protection of the natural environment and cultural heritage sites. Again, Professor Hanlon will talk more about this. For All Moonkind has been at the very forefront of this. The agreement says that the states parties will figure out how to do this, create an organization, or designate another organization like UNESCO to do it. Although they can't do it right now, Professor Hanlon will explain why. The backup is that if nothing else is created, that any mission that's more than 20 years old by the time a new mission is authorized is automatically protected until the new system is put in place. So that addresses that issue. Number 8, governance and fees. Now we get to adaptive governance. Adaptive governance is actually from the Moon Treaty itself. You may have noticed along the way that I've been trying to point out where the different organizations come in and where different parts of this implementation treaty have come from other people and other organizations. Now, the first chunk that had to do with broadening the definition of resources to include all private activity, and then also making the licensing automatic as long as the country abides by all the treaties, that's my contribution. And that's kind of the key. That's what makes it all work. Everything else is put in here because it's been recommended by other people or organizations. And rightly so. After working on this for a few years, these are all important concepts, concerns, and they all need to be addressed. Adaptive governance, it's called for by Article 11 and 18. Even if this agreement is adopted, it must be reviewed in no later than 10 years, and possibly even sooner if enough countries ask for it. That's adaptive governance. If a subject comes up that needs to be addressed, the state's parties will make that substantive decision. Not the agency. The agency only administers it. States parties do, and there's a method for doing it. How do they resolve disputes? Well, the Moon Treaty starts by saying there's consultation between the countries. But the Hague Group's building blocks and others have recommended using arbitration. In fact, there is already in existence the 2011 Permanent Court of Arbitration optional rules for arbitration of disputes relating to outer space activities through an organization called the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Then the problem came up, well, how do you enforce these things? And fortunately, I ran into a lawyer representing the Silicon Valley business groups. He was at the last space conference I spoke at, and he came up and said, hey, there's already a convention that does that. It's called the Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards, sometimes called the New York Convention. So after talking it over with some other people who are involved in this, we said, hey, let's do it. So we stuck that in there. That's how the implementation agreement has evolved. That's how it will evolve as things come up. Finally, the controlling law and the rights of individuals and settlements. The Outer Space Treaty and the Moon Treaty all say that the controlling law at any location is going to be the law of the country that has authorized that mission, that continues to supervise that mission. We're kind of stuck with that right now. Until, if the states parties want to, they can create a more common law, so to speak. But until that happens, this is a backup. We also have to pay a little bit of attention, though. You might call it the Bill of Rights of outer space law. And this was brought up by the founder of the L5 Society, who commented on this for me. They've been absorbed, or they merged with the National Space Society, who has pretty much the same attitude on these things. As you'll see in the bottom, it says, nothing in this agreement or in the treaty shall be interpreted as denying or limiting the rights guaranteed to individuals by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the right of settlements to seek autonomy and or recognition as sovereign nations. This may seem a little obscure, far-fetched, or even science fiction-like, but it is a real concern of many, many people today. In fact, there may be more people concerned about this than there are about doing commerce in outer space. This has to be part of any implementation agreement, or else it will not gain widespread support, and indeed, it may actually fail. Okay, so that's the 10 paragraphs here. A little more to go, and then we should be able to wrap it up. At this moment in time, it is space law itself that needs capacity building. The current framework is inadequate, resulting in endless arguments over the meaning of outdated agreements. The time has come to craft new agreements that will facilitate the peaceful and sustainable development of outer space. I'm going to start to run out of time here, so I'm going to kind of zip through these ones. Okay, there are some who believe that space is a war-fighting domain, that their own country must dominate in space. I have a quote up here from one such person, but I suspect that every spacefaring state has some policymakers who believe this. In the United States, they're even calling for that if people want to be part of the Artemis Accords, that they're going to have to drop out of the Moon Treaty. That would be Australia, who has to be a party to both. And that's just not right. Using economic advantage to try to push one's own version of the law is the national dominance model. It is not the international cooperation model. And those are the choices we have now. International cooperation or national dominance. Every day, people wake up to the news of worsening climate change, increasing social unrest, and rising international conflict. And now we have the threat of war in outer space to add to that. And it seems that governments are unable or unwilling to stop it. The people of Earth are beginning to despair, wondering if there's a future they can believe in. They are losing hope, and the resulting cynicism is poisoning our politics, our relationships, even our thinking. This is the last slide. The mission of space law, and I dare say the mission of the entire space community, must be nothing less than to restore that hope, to inspire humanity by giving the people of our planet a future they can believe in, to give them that shining city on the hill that will light the way for all. We can do that, but we must avoid the mistakes of the last age of exploration. But we must act immediately. There's only one time when we will be leaving our home world, only one chance to create a new pattern that will lead each person and humanity itself to their best destiny. That time is now. Please join in this effort to inspire humanity, to restore hope, and to create a better world, a better universe for everyone. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll answer any questions the time allows.
Thank you, Dennis. We have a question from Benjamin. He asked, where can we access the IA you shared? And I assume that means international agreement. Is that right, Benjamin?
Oh, yes, that's an excellent question. I forgot to tell people about the website where I got these things. And all this is, by the way, at this website, the Space Treaty Project, spacetreaty.org. It's that simple, spacetreaty.org. And there's a drop-down menu at the top. And that menu will take you to everything. The model implementation agreement is here, including the papers that support it. I also have several articles that I've written that have been published on the Space Review and other online magazine. There are links to other organizations. There's also a link to a petition, which let's see if that works real quick here. A petition on one nation or all nations, who should make the laws of outer space. So there's a link there that you can go to if you want to sign that petition, and you can share that if you'd like. We have almost 600 signatures already. So there it is, spacetreaty.org.
Chris says, this is a fantastic presentation, incredibly inspiring.
Well, I thank you very much for that. I know there's a lot that I tried to pack in here. I encourage people to read all these things. If you have any questions, and even more important than questions, if you see something there that you don't think will work, please contact me. My email is dennisobrien@spacetreaty.org. There's a contact support section there in the Space Treaty Project. You can get that information. And please, write to me. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me why there has to be some improvement, or just an area we forgot about. We need that. This has to be a bottom-up approach that includes all organizations and anyone who's interested. So please, if you have anything, send an email.
Good stuff. All right,
Dennis,
I think we've...
Dennis, I have a question for you. This is
Yes.
Jaden Sage. Hi. So I'm quite averse in the legal matters in Earth side. And I wanted to ask you regarding reinforcement. Reinforcement will be placed in the scale opposite of valuable resources. And when there are valuable resources, there tends to be military might attached to that endeavor. So what I'm trying to say is that if there are valuable enough resources that are applied, all of a sudden treaties get torn apart and justifications, legal and otherwise, are presented to warrant justifications of those actions. Wanted to know your thoughts about how long any of these treaties will last as soon as we have some valuable resources we're dealing with.
Well, we're facing that tension right now, I believe. That's why the United States has proposed these Artemis Accords, which already try to justify the taking of resources using their own national law. I am not a Pollyanna. I did not get into this because I thought, oh, everything will just work out. I specifically got into it because I had the same concern, the same fear, that once we start finding things that are valuable and important, even scarce, that we're going to start fighting over it. And the Outer Space Treaty is being turned on its head to try to show how people can do things that are not peaceful, that are not sharing. And I'm afraid the Outer Space Treaty just is not powerful happening. The Moon Treaty is more specific, and this implementation agreement is helpful. If you set up a way to avoid disputes, for example, if two companies or two countries wanted to go after the same resource, like ice in a particular crater near the South Pole on the Moon, then if they both were going at it at the same time or even subsequent to each other, the treaty requires them to consult about that. It even offers the option of arbitration, binding arbitration if they can't do it. It is true that ultimately, if they can't sort it out, that it may come to war. We've known that throughout all of recorded human histories, that when the circumstances are right, some countries will just ignore treaties and go to war. But it is also true that the more treaties there are, the more countries that are signatories to those treaties, the less likely that there will be war. Okay? There was not a World War III because the United Nations and its dedication to peace kept it from happening. I know there's a lot of other stuff and there's still a lot of war going on. The point is, if we set up dispute resolution procedures, conflict avoidance procedures now, and if people know where they stand, if they have the certainty of the legal framework in hand, if there is a guarantee that every country can tap those resources without harmful interference, then I think that will go a long way to avoiding war. Absolutely get rid of it? Maybe not. But outer space offers us a blank slate. The longer we can maintain peace in outer space, the more likely it is we will have peace on Earth. And that is a big reason why I'm doing this.
As a follow-up, do you feel that what China's trying to accomplish in the South Pole of the Moon, I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. Well, under the old way of doing things, where countries would go plant a flag, China would already have a substantial claim to the South Pole because of they put a lander there, they put a rover there, they're going to soon have a working laboratory there. That would allow them to make claim on that. However, the Outer Space Treaty with its non-appropriation clause and the Moon Treaty with the implementation agreement would go a long way to making sure that everyone shares those resources. The United States has, in its Artemis things, it says that they are going to the South Pole also. It's our duty, our generation, to have the opportunity to stop war from happening there. If we can do that, then we will have served humanity, and centuries from now, they'll be talking about what we achieved here. Thanks for the questions. They were very helpful. Thank you. Thanks to the Moon Society. Bye-bye.